Welcome back to a special edition of Business Breakthroughs with your host, Larry Prince, where we're talking about navigating the coronavirus. We've talked about your business, yourself, your people. Now we're going to address our finances and how you protect the business. And again, appreciate your patience that we're doing this remotely. Larry, let's talk about exactly how to handle the finances during the crisis.
Barry, thank you. And, we talked about on the previous podcast, taking a look at your people and being sensitive to their needs and making tough business decisions and also being sensitive to yourself. But the core that gets this all going is really evaluating your finances and knowing first how much cash you had on hand. And I think the best thing I could do is actually talk about a session I facilitated with a management team of a company of about $6 million revenue a year and what they did to evaluate their finances.
And where did they start?
We were facilitating behind the scenes first before we got the entire management team together remotely. It started with the CFO doing an evaluation of cash positions, cash on hand, and reserves, of course, and also conducting a break-even analysis, looking at current expenses, looking at revenue projections, and then putting together different scenarios, best case, base case, worst case scenarios, looking at those elements. She presented it to the management team. That was the start point of this process.
Right. So for how long a period did they do that?
We looked at the end of March through Q2. And so here's what we did. We had to make some hard choices around projected revenues. And to do that, we broke it down month by month and literally even got as granular as looking at the different customer segments. What can you reasonably expect on a month-to-month basis? Then we looked at a comparison to cash in hand and current expenses. So Barry, now we knew the gap between projected revenues, what's possible, versus current expenses. So Barry, once we knew what the gap is, the difference between projected revenue, what's possible, versus current expenses, we were able to, as a management team with my facilitation, discuss how to close that gap.
So, Larry, I guess that's where the tough questions come in about staffing and expenses.
Barry, it does. And those are the tough questions. And we had to put them right on the table and be honest about them. Do we need to cut people? Do we need to furlough people? How do we do it maybe in phases? And what do we eliminate in terms of non-essential expenses? What can we live without? And it got deeper than that. We also had to talk about financing options, loans, and strategies for working with vendors and creditors. And now they're talking to their landlord about negotiating the timing of their rent.
So, Larry, when you talk about connecting your people with the finances, how do you convey this to your staff?
Barry, that's a good point. And that's what we finished the discussion on. How do we communicate this to the employees? Tough decisions were made, but employees had to know about them. And so what we had to do is, like we talked about in the previous podcast, treat people like adults. Be honest with them. What employees want to know is, can we stay in business 3 months, 6 months, a year? What's our future? What's our financial strength? And so we put together a plan for communicating that. And that plan really helps to treat people as adults and lessen the anxiety.
Right. So once again, you started the whole financial analysis with a detailed assessment of the company's cash flow and their position. And then you proceeded to determine what the gap was between projected expenses and cash on hand. Right. And then from there, you determined what kind of decisions you had to make in terms of staff cuts or furloughs or eliminating any non-essential services. And then from there, you went to communicating a plan to the employees on where the company was going short-term, getting through the crisis, correct?
Barry, great summary. The key here is that in the last 2 weeks since I facilitated that session with the management team, they put together a communication plan and implemented it. So employees knew where they stood individually and where the company stood moving forward. And that was the key. How you treat people as adults and communicate the decisions that are being made.
Larry, that's great information. Could you share another example on how another business is handling the crisis from a financial standpoint?
Sure, Barry. I was talking to a business owner who I know for many years, and he owns a high-end sneaker store, where runners love to go to buy their sneakers to prepare for their marathons and so on. And we were talking about his finances, and we were talking about his business and his people and the tough decisions. But I asked him, how are you managing your finances? And he said what he did is he looked at cash on hand first. And secondly, he estimated by moving his store to an online presence, what he estimated will come in 2-week intervals. So he created 2-week plans, cash in, cash out, how you manage employees. And by doing that in 2-week intervals and communicating that to his employees, and he had to go ahead and furlough a group of them for now and have a skeleton crew. But at least he was able to give them a rationale for his decision, give them a time frame for how things will go the next few months. And for him, he gave himself 2-week markers to be able to make a business adjustments based on what really does come in and what his expenses really will be.
So in his case, it was a matter of changing the business model temporarily.
That's what I respect about him. He's a good business guy. He's a great employer. He has a sense of what his market is, and he made those adjustments.
All right, so Larry, if you would, summarize how businesses should proceed financially to protect themselves through the crisis.
Barry, we have to consider what we talked about on a previous podcast, and that is your people, the business decisions around your marketplace, around your customers and your operations, and around yourself as a business leader and your own emotions and how this is affecting your relationships. So when we look at this holistically, then the financial decisions we make have a better place to land. And it all begins with looking at cash flow, cash positions, cash on hand, looking at expenses, and determining what in short intervals, whether it's monthly or 2-week intervals, what are the break-even points? What are the gap between what you estimate you're going to get in, what your cash on hand is, with that of your expenses? And when you line that up and you do so thoughtfully with people and your business in consideration, you can make the best decisions for your business overall.
You've been listening to a special edition of Business Breakthroughs with Larry Prince of Prince Leadership on how to navigate the coronavirus. For more, go to PrinceLeadership.com or call Larry directly at 973-670-6304. Once again, that's 973-670-6304, or email him at larry@princeleadership.com.